The first time I heard her cry, it was a quiet Sunday afternoon. Sunlight spilled through the curtains of our small neighborhood in Silver Creek, where everything looked ordinary except that day, nothing felt ordinary at all. I had gone over to drop off a school project for my best friend, Aaron, who wasn't home. But his mother, Mrs. Carter, stood at the door with trembling eyes, her hair tied back in a messy bun, and a half-finished cup of coffee sitting cold on the kitchen counter behind her. There was something about the silence that followed that stuck with me. And when she whispered, "We're alone," it didn't sound like an invitation, it sounded like a confession. Before we go deeper, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, Kindness Journal. It helps us spread stories that remind the world there's still good in every heart, even when it's breaking down. I remember hesitating for a moment at the doorway. Aaron's mom, her name was Elise, had always been warm, soft-spoken, the kind of person who brought snacks to soccer practice and laughed even when things went wrong. But that day, her smile was missing, and her eyes looked like they hadn't slept in days. I stepped inside quietly, placing the project folder on the dining table, noticing the faint smell of lavender and burnt toast in the air. The house, usually filled with chatter and music, felt empty. A framed picture of Aaron with his father had been turned face down on the shelf, a detail that hit harder than I expected. Elise sat down on the edge of the couch and covered her face with her hands. I didn't know what to say. I was only 19 then, just starting college, caught between my own storms and the illusion that adults always had things figured out. She spoke without looking up, her voice trembling. "He left, Alex, just packed a bag and left. No goodbye, no reason. I didn't ask who, because I already knew. Mr. Carter had been struggling with his business, drinking too much, arguing late at night when he thought no one could hear. I'd heard the muffled fights through Aaron's open window when we stayed up late gaming online. I sat down across from her, unsure if I belonged there. "I'm sorry," was all I could manage, but she just shook her head and whispered, "I'm tired of pretending everything's fine." That sentence stayed with me long after I left that day. Over the next few weeks, Aaron barely came to class. His mother stopped showing up at the school charity events she used to organize. Their front yard, once lined with fresh daisies, went untended, and the mailbox overflowed with unopened envelopes. I'd see Elise sometimes, walking to the corner store in her worn cardigan, holding a grocery bag that looked too heavy for her frame. She'd always manage a faint smile when she saw me, but her eyes told another story, a story of loss, exhaustion, and quiet endurance. Then one Saturday morning, Aaron texted me saying he had to go visit his father out of town for a few days. Before I could even respond, my phone buzzed again. It was Elise. She asked if I could help her fix a leaky faucet since Aaron wasn't around. I hesitated, unsure if I was crossing some invisible line, but she sounded so fragile that I couldn't say no. When I arrived, sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, lighting up the dust in the air. Elise was kneeling under the sink, her hair falling loosely over her face. I offered to help, and she smiled faintly, handing me a wrench. "I used to fix these things with him," she said softly, referring to her husband. "Now even the pipes sound lonely." We both laughed, but it wasn't the happy kind, it was the kind that hides pain. As we worked, I noticed how much she had changed. The bright, energetic woman I used to know had become quieter, gentler, and somehow more human in her brokenness. There was a strength in the way she carried her sadness, like someone who had accepted it as part of who they were. When the faucet finally stopped leaking, she looked at me and whispered, "We're alone." There was a pause, a long one where even the ticking clock seemed hesitant to move forward. I looked around the room, at the sunlight spilling across the table, at the half-empty cup of tea, at her tired eyes. "Just for a little while," I said softly, "if that's okay." We didn't say anything else for a moment. She smiled, this time genuinely, as if hearing those words gave her permission to breathe again. I sat with her as she made tea, and we talked, not about sadness, but about memories. She told me how Aaron used to build little cardboard forts in the living room, how her husband once drove 4 hours in the rain just to bring her flowers after a fight. She talked about her dreams before marriage, how she wanted to open an art studio but traded paintbrushes for practicality. I listened, because that's all she needed, a listener, not a fixer. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself stopping by often. Sometimes to help with chores, sometimes to drop off groceries, and sometimes just to sit on the porch and talk. She'd tell me about her garden plans, or about the books she was reading. There was a quiet rhythm forming, a kind of friendship that grew out of shared silences and unspoken understanding, but not everyone saw it that way. People in small towns like Silver Creek loved to talk. Rumors began to spread, ugly, baseless whispers about why a young man spent so much time at a widowed woman's home. I tried to ignore them, but I could see how it hurt her. One afternoon, as we painted the garden fence, she stopped mid-stroke and said, "They don't understand kindness anymore. Everything's twisted now." I could see tears gathering in her eyes, and I wanted to protect her from every cruel word, but I knew I couldn't. That evening, I found Aaron sitting on the steps outside my dorm. His face was tense, his voice sharper than usual. "People are talking, Alex. They think something's going on between you and my mom." I froze, words caught in my throat. Before I could explain, he continued, "I know you're not like that. But maybe just give her space. She's been through enough." He left before I could respond, and for the first time, I felt truly helpless. I stayed away for a while. Weeks passed, and though life went on, something in me felt incomplete. One morning, I saw Elise outside the grocery store. Her hair was shorter, and she looked lighter somehow. She smiled when she saw me, the kind of smile that comes from surviving storms. "I heard you got that internship you wanted," she said. I nodded. "Yeah, I did. Thanks to you. You kept me believing I could." She reached into her bag and handed me a small envelope. "Open it when you're ready," she said. That evening, when I sat on my bed and opened it, I found a folded piece of paper with a single line written in her neat handwriting. "You reminded me that kindness doesn't always come from love, it often creates it." I didn't see Elise for a long time after that. Aaron moved away, and their house eventually sold. Life scattered us in different directions, as it often does. But every time I pass through Silver Creek, I glance at that old corner house, the one with the garden fence we painted together, and I'd remember that chapter of my life where compassion taught me more than any book ever could. Years later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from Elise. She had opened her art studio, finally living the dream she once buried beneath duty and heartbreak. The letter ended with a line that made my eyes sting. "You once said, just for a little while." But that moment was enough to remind me that I wasn't invisible. Thank you for seeing me. That day, I drove back to Silver Creek. The studio sat at the corner of Maple and 3rd Street, its walls painted in soft blues and whites. The front door was open, and children's laughter echoed from inside as they painted with bright colors on easels. Elise stood near the window, guiding a little girl's hand as she drew a flower. When she noticed me, her eyes widened in surprise, and then she smiled, the same gentle smile from years ago, now healed, now whole. We didn't need to say much. She introduced me to her students, showed me their paintings, and told me how the studio had become a place where people came not just to paint but to heal. "You started this," she said quietly. "You believed in me when I couldn't." As I walked out into the afternoon sunlight, the world felt softer somehow. I realized that sometimes, the smallest gestures, a visit, a few kind words, or a simple promise, can save someone who's been silently fading. And even though that moment had passed long ago, its warmth still lived on. If this story touched your heart today, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Journal. Let's remind the world that kindness isn't weakness, it's the strength that keeps us human.